Patton was not sent to France only to defeat Germany. He was sent to control an ally. And if this had failed, the liberation of Europe could have collapsed from the inside long before Berlin fell. In August 1944, General Dwight D. Eisenhower faced a crisis that did not come from the Wehrmacht. It came from a man who was supposed to be on his side. Charles de Gaulle was not fighting the Germans anymore. He was fighting for the future of France, and he was ready to challenge the entire Allied command to win that fight. He demanded recognition as the only legitimate leader of France. He insisted that French forces must liberate Paris alone. He wanted control over military operations on French soil, and he threatened to withdraw French divisions from Allied command if these demands were ignored. This was not just politics. It was a direct threat to the unity of the coalition that was invading Europe. Eisenhower understood the danger immediately. The Allied war effort depended on coordination. American, British, Canadian, and French forces had to move as one machine. If that machine fractured, Germany would gain time. Time meant more casualties. Time meant the war might drag on for years. But there was another problem. France was not just territory. It was a nation returning from occupation with competing visions of power. Resistance fighters, political factions, military commanders. Some wanted democracy. Others wanted revolution. Some wanted national pride restored at any cost. Paris was becoming a symbol. Whoever liberated it would shape the future government of France. De Gaulle knew this. That was why he pushed so hard. The Americans did not trust him. Franklin D. Roosevelt considered him unpredictable. Winston Churchill found him exhausting. Eisenhower believed he cared more about prestige than victory. But de Gaulle had leverage. French divisions were already fighting inside the Allied system. Removing them could open dangerous gaps. Then came the moment that shocked the Allied staff. In early August, as the breakout from Normandy accelerated, de Gaulle made a final demand. Paris must be liberated immediately, not bypassed, not delayed, and not by Americans. Eisenhower's generals argued the opposite. Paris had little military value. Feeding millions of civilians would strain logistics. Divisions needed to push east toward Germany, not get trapped in urban fighting. The logical decision was clear. Ignore Paris, destroy the German army first. But de Gaulle threatened to march on the capital alone. If the Allies refused, he would act independently. The consequences could be catastrophic. Civil conflict, political chaos, breakdown of command. Eisenhower was trapped between strategy and alliance, and that is when he made a decision that never appeared in official reports. He turned to one man who could solve political crises without diplomacy, George S. Patton. But before we go deeper, remember, this channel is not free. The price is simple. Like the video, subscribe, and write your opinion in the comments. Because what happens next will change how you see coalition warfare forever. Patton's Third Army was already racing across France. His forces were faster than expected. German defenses were collapsing. Supply lines stretched but held. Momentum was everything. Eisenhower called Patton. The conversation was short. No paperwork, no long debate. French forces would enter Paris first. But American power would surround the city. Roads, artillery, logistics, control. The world would see a French victory. The reality would be American command. Patton understood instantly. This was not about tactics. It was about leverage. August 25, 1944. French tanks rolled into Paris. Crowds celebrated. Flags returned. Years of occupation ended in a single explosion of emotion. De Gaulle declared that France had liberated itself. But behind the scenes, Patton had already secured every road. American artillery waited outside the city. American trucks carried food. American engineers restored supply routes. The liberation looked French. The operation was American. The message was clear. And when de Gaulle held his victory parade the next day, Patton made sure he was seen. Polished helmet, ivory revolvers, Third Army insignia, positioned where the French leader could not ignore him. No words, no threats, only presence. The effect was immediate, but this was only the beginning, because in the weeks that followed, France itself began to fracture. Rival generals, communist resistance, political ambition, armed groups refusing orders. And if this chaos spread, it could destroy the Allied advance from within. What happened next forced Eisenhower to use Patton in a way the public would never know, and it would turn the most aggressive battlefield commander of the war into something far more dangerous. A political weapon. World War II coalition warfare was never just about defeating Germany. It was about control, power, and survival after the war. And in September 1944, the biggest threat to Allied unity was no longer the Wehrmacht. It was France itself. The crisis did not begin on the battlefield. It began in liberated cities. As German forces retreated, power vacuums opened. Local leaders rushed to fill them. Resistance groups seized towns. Political factions armed themselves. Some wanted democracy, others wanted revolution. Many wanted revenge, and every one of them believed the war had given them the right to decide France's future. This was the moment when General Dwight D. Eisenhower realized the liberation of France could collapse into civil conflict. Allied supply lines stretched from Normandy to the front. Millions of tons of fuel, ammunition, and food moved through French roads and railways every day. If those routes broke, the advance into Germany would stop. The war would drag on. More lives would be lost. Yet in southern France, discipline was breaking down. General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny had his own ambitions. He commanded French First Army. He was brilliant, he was aggressive, and he wanted glory. He began moving his divisions not for military necessity, but for political positioning. Cities, ports, strategic regions, areas that would give him influence after the war. American officers noticed quickly. Roads became blocked, rail lines slowed, convoys delayed, supplies stacked up. The advance toward Germany began to choke. Eisenhower's staff warned him, if this continued, the entire southern front could collapse. But confronting French commanders directly risked a political explosion. France had just been liberated. The world was watching. The Soviets were watching. So Eisenhower turned again to the man who did not care about political theater. He sent George S. Patton, Act 1. The confrontation, September 12, 1944. Patton arrived without warning. No formal visit, no diplomatic message, no ceremony. He drove straight to headquarters. The French staff were shocked. The American general did not wait. He entered the command post and asked to see de Lattre immediately. The meeting began politely. It did not stay polite. Patton explained the problem. Roads, logistics, timing, war. De Lattre answered with politics, public opinion, French pride, national leadership. Patton interrupted. War came first. Everything else came later. The message was simple. American forces had a schedule. Germany would be defeated. Anyone slowing that schedule would be removed. De Lattre protested. He had orders. He had authority. He represented France. Patton stood up. He said American columns would move through those roads in 48 hours. If French units were still there, the Americans would move around them, or through them. Then he left. The entire conversation lasted minutes. Act 2. The escalation. Delattre called Paris immediately. He contacted Charles de Gaulle. He explained the situation. He described the ultimatum. De Gaulle understood something most people did not. He knew American power. He had already seen it in Paris. He had seen the supply columns, the artillery, the aircraft, the endless resources. He told Delattre to cooperate. Within 24 hours, French forces moved. The crisis ended, but a bigger problem remained. Communist resistance groups still controlled large parts of the countryside. They had weapons, they had popular support, and they did not trust either French generals or Americans. Some of them believed the liberation was only the first step toward revolution. They refused integration. They refused orders. They controlled roads. They threatened supply lines. Eisenhower faced a nightmare. He could not fight former resistance fighters. The political damage would be enormous, but he could not allow armed groups to control Allied logistics. Again, Patton offered a solution. Act 3. The psychological campaign. Patton did not bring divisions. He brought conversations. He traveled across towns and villages. He met leaders face to face. He praised their courage, their sacrifices, their fight against Germany. Then he explained reality. The war was not over. Germany still fought. Every delay cost lives. Allied armies would move. Convoys would pass. Railroads would operate, with cooperation or without it. There were no threats, not openly. But the meaning was clear. Patton's army had destroyed German resistance across France in weeks. It could remove anyone who interfered. Most leaders understood immediately. Some resisted. Those groups soon found military police inspecting their weapons. French regular forces appearing nearby. Supplies disappearing. The message spread. By early October 1944, resistance groups integrated or stood down. Supply lines stabilized. The advance toward Germany accelerated again. The crisis ended. But few people knew what had really happened. Even today, official histories describe diplomacy, negotiations, political compromise. But behind the scenes, power had spoken, and the war in Europe continued because of it. Now here is the question. If you were in Eisenhower's position, what would you have done? Use diplomacy and risk chaos, or use fear and guarantee victory? Write your answer in the comments. There is no safe choice. Because in the final months of World War II, every decision meant lives, and the consequences of these decisions would shape Europe for decades. But the most dangerous moment was still coming, and it would test not just France, but the entire Allied alliance. That is where the story becomes even more explosive. World War II coalition politics reached its most dangerous point in the autumn of 1944. Germany was collapsing, but victory made the Allies weaker, not stronger. Because once the common enemy began to fall, mistrust returned, and France was no longer the only concern. The real problem was the future of Europe. Every Allied nation had a different vision. The United States wanted stability and open markets. Britain wanted balance of power. The Soviet Union wanted security and influence. France wanted restoration and prestige. These goals could not all exist together, and General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood in the center of this storm. He was not only a commander anymore, he was a political referee. The crisis exploded in October 1944. As Allied armies pushed toward Germany, the question emerged: who would control liberated territory? Who would rebuild Europe? Who would decide borders, governments, and armies? In eastern France, American forces moved fast. They secured towns, rail hubs, bridges. French leaders began to worry. If Americans controlled everything, France might become dependent, weak, marginalized. So new resistance appeared. Local officials delayed cooperation. French units slowed coordination. Political groups spread rumors. Some claimed the Americans wanted permanent occupation. The atmosphere became tense. This was no longer a military problem. It was psychological warfare between allies. Eisenhower understood the danger immediately. If distrust spread, the coalition could fracture before Germany surrendered. He needed a demonstration, not of force against enemies, but of unity and control. Once again, he turned to George S. Patton. But this time, the mission was different. Not confrontation, not intimidation, stability. Act 1. The show of cooperation. Eisenhower ordered joint operations. American and French units would move together, patrol together, secure regions together. Patton coordinated with French commanders directly. He invited them to planning sessions, shared intelligence, offered logistics support. French officers saw something unexpected. American power did not mean domination. It meant efficiency. Fuel arrived faster. Ammunition was abundant. Air support immediate. Trust began to grow. But not everyone accepted this. Communist factions warned that American influence would reshape Europe. They pushed for more independence, more control. Some sabotage continued. Act 2, the hidden threat. In November 1944, a crisis nearly erupted. A major supply convoy was delayed in eastern France. Local armed groups blocked roads. They claimed security concerns. In reality, it was political pressure. Patton reacted instantly. He did not send troops. He sent a message. Convoys would move at dawn. Any obstruction would be removed. No debate. No delay. The convoy rolled forward. The roads were clear. No resistance appeared. The message spread across France. American logistics was unstoppable. This was the foundation of victory. Not tanks, not artillery, supply. And everyone understood. Act 3. The final test. December 1944. The German army launched its last great offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. Allied lines broke. Units retreated. Chaos returned. And suddenly, political rivalry disappeared. French and American forces fought side by side. Convoys moved through snow and fire. Roads reopened. Bridges repaired. Patton's Third Army turned north in one of the fastest redeployments in military history. French units supported the advance. Resistance groups provided intelligence. The coalition held. Germany failed. The crisis ended not because of politics, but because survival demanded unity. By early 1945, trust inside the Allied command was stronger than ever. The lesson was clear. Coalition warfare was not about friendship. It was about shared necessity. Eisenhower later reflected on this privately. Alliances were fragile. They survived only when leaders balanced power and respect. Too much force created rebellion. Too much diplomacy created chaos. The key was credibility, and that credibility had a face. Patton, he rarely appeared in official reports. He was not a diplomat. He was not subtle, but his presence shaped decisions across Europe. French leaders knew the limits of confrontation. Resistance groups knew the cost of obstruction, and Allied unity survived. Here is the paradox. The general feared by enemies helped preserve cooperation among allies, and without that, the war in Europe might have lasted longer, or ended very differently. Now think about this. Was Eisenhower's strategy brilliant leadership or dangerous manipulation of allies? Would you trust a partner who used fear to maintain unity? Write your opinion in the comments. There is no simple answer, because this story is not only about the past, it is about how modern alliances still work today. And if you want to understand how these fragile coalitions shaped the Cold War and the world we live in now, watch the next video on this channel. The real battle for Europe did not end in 1945. It only changed form. World War II alliances did not end when Germany surrendered. They transformed into something far more dangerous. The real conflict began when the common enemy disappeared and former partners started preparing for the next war. In May 1945, victory in Europe looked complete. Cities were liberated. Armies celebrated. Flags filled the streets. But behind the scenes, tension grew faster than at any moment during the war. Because now the question was simple and terrifying. Who would control the future? General Dwight D. Eisenhower understood this before most political leaders. He saw the signs. Soviet forces were not just liberating Eastern Europe. They were staying. Governments were changing. Borders were shifting. And trust was evaporating. France again became a critical factor. The country that had nearly fractured Allied unity in 1944 now stood between American and Soviet influence in Western Europe. A weak France meant instability. A strong France meant balance. But France was still divided. Political factions fought for control. Communists gained popularity after leading resistance against Germany. Conservatives feared revolution. The army worried about internal collapse. Eisenhower knew something most people did not. If France collapsed politically, Western Europe could follow. So the mission did not end with victory. It changed. Act 1. Stabilizing Europe. American forces stayed in key regions. Logistics networks continued operating. Food and fuel were distributed not only to armies, but to civilians. This prevented chaos. It also built influence. French leaders saw that cooperation with the United States brought stability and recovery. Opposition weakened. At the same time, American command avoided humiliation of French pride. Local authorities remained visible. National identity was protected. This balance was intentional. Power without humiliation, strength without domination. Act 2. The Cold War begins. By late 1945, cooperation with the Soviet Union was collapsing. Suspicion replaced partnership. Intelligence reports warned about expansion, and Europe became the front line. Eisenhower's experience during the liberation shaped future strategy. Military force alone could not win long conflicts. Alliances mattered more. Trust mattered more. But trust required credibility, and credibility required strength. The lessons learned in France influenced everything that followed. NATO, Western unity, strategic deterrence. The idea was simple: prevent conflict through visible power and reliable partnerships, not through weakness, not through isolation. This became the foundation of modern Western security. Act 3. The Hidden Legacy. Years later, many historians focused on battles: Normandy, the Bulge, Berlin. But fewer studied the political battlefield behind the front lines, the struggle to keep allies from turning against each other, the silent pressure, the negotiations, the demonstrations of strength that never appeared in official communiques. And one figure remains central to that hidden war: George S. Patton. Not only a battlefield commander, but a symbol. His reputation prevented crises before they started. His presence forced cooperation without open confrontation. This saved time, saved resources, possibly saved lives, because a fractured alliance could have prolonged the war or triggered conflict between former partners. The truth is uncomfortable. Victory was not only achieved through heroism, it was managed through pressure and sometimes fear. This raises a deeper question. Is unity built on trust stronger than unity built on power? Or is power the only real foundation of alliances? Look at today's world. military blocs, strategic partnerships, political tension. The same patterns exist, the same dilemmas. Leaders still face the same impossible choice: compromise and risk weakness, or show strength and risk division. Now the final twist. Eisenhower later warned that the greatest danger to Western security would not come from enemies, but from internal conflict and political fragmentation. He believed alliances collapse from inside long before they are defeated from outside. History has proven this more than once, and it may happen again. So here's the real question. Did the Allies truly win the war, or did they only delay the next global confrontation? Write your opinion in the comments. This debate has never ended. And if you want to see how these hidden decisions shaped the Cold War, nuclear strategy, and the modern world, watch the next video on this channel. Because the most dangerous battles in history are the ones no one sees.